Dear students, today let's discuss on the topic adoption, diffusion, innovation. Let's start with the introduction. One of the major goals of extension is to get new and profitable technologies adopted by a rural community. An understanding of the adoption and diffusion processes shall help the extension agent to accelerate them. In short, adoption can be defined as a decision to make full use of an innovation as the best choice of actions available, and diffusion is the innovation communicated through communication channels over time. So, an innovation is an idea, practice, or object that is perceived as new by an individual or other units of adoption. Let's come to the adoption process. Rice Wren and Neil C. Gross in the year 1943 were probably the first to recognize that the adoption of a new idea consisted of stages. They distinguished between the awareness of an innovation to conviction of its usefulness, then acceptance and complete adoption of the innovation. Adoption is essentially a decision-making process. It is a process comprising a sequence of stages with a distinct type of activity occurring during each stage. Further, the North Central Rural Sociology Subcommittee for the Study of Diffusion of Farm Practices in the year 1995 identified 5 stages of the adoption process which received worldwide attention. According to them, adoption is not an instantaneous act. It is a process that occurs over a period of time and consists of a series of actions. These are: Number 1. Awareness stage. The individual learns of the existence of a new idea but lacks information about it. For example, the person may know only the name and may not know what the idea is, what it will do, or how it will work. So the second stage is the interest stage. The individual develops interest in the innovation and seeks additional information about it. Example, the person wants to know what it is, how it works, and what are its potentialities. The third stage is the evaluation stage. The individual makes mental application of the new idea to the present and anticipated future situations and decides whether or not to try it. Example, the person makes an assessment whether the idea is applicable to own situation, or if applied, what would be the result. The fourth stage is the trial stage. The individual actually applies the new idea on a small scale in order to determine its utility in its own situation. Example, the person needs to taste a new idea even though they have thought about it for a long time and gathered information concerning it. The fifth stage is the adoption stage. The individual uses the new idea continuously on a full scale. Example, being satisfied with the trial and considering the pros and cons of the situation, the individual takes a final decision and applies the innovation in a scale appropriate to our situation on a continued basis. According to Y.P. Singh, in the year 1965, the stages of adoption are dynamic and not static. The same 5 stages do not occur with all the adopters and all the practices. The scheme of stages are: Number 1 is the need. In this stage, the individual wishes the situation according to change, expresses dissatisfaction, and develops a compromise. The second stage, according to him, is the awareness. The individual comes to know of something which is related to one's own need or arouses the need. The person becomes acquainted with broad features of the innovation and knows the source of availability. The third stage is interest. The individual tries to know more about the innovation. He seeks information and sees the innovation. The fourth stage is the deliberation. The individual mentally examines the possibility of application of the innovation under own condition. He seeks advice of the opinion leaders, observes the performance at different places, and discusses with his family. He then takes a decision to try out or reject the idea. The fifth stage is the trial. The individual applies the practice on a limited scale to observe the performance under own conditions. The sixth stage is the evaluation. The individual observes the performance of the innovation on various dimensions. He collects data and compares performance of the innovation on other situations. He calculates input, output, risks, uncertainties, etc. The seventh stage, according to him, is the adoption. The individual extends use of the innovations in terms of time and extent. Now, let's come to the topic, the diffusion process. Diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. It is a special type of communication in that the messages are concerned with new ideas. It is the newness of the idea in the message content of communication that gives diffusion a special character. The diffusion of innovations is essentially a social process in which subjectivity perceived information about a new idea is communicated. One reason why there is so much interest in the diffusion of innovation is because getting a new idea adopted, even when it has obvious advantages, is often very difficult. There is a wide gap in many fields between what is known and what is actually put into use. Many innovations require a lengthy period, often of some years from the time when they become available to the time when they are widely adopted. Therefore, a common problem for many individuals and organizations is how to speed up the rate of diffusion of an innovation. Many technologies think that advantageous innovation will sell themselves, that the obvious benefits of a new idea will be widely realized by the potential adopters, and that the innovation will therefore diffuse rapidly. Unfortunately, this is very seldom the case. Most innovation, in fact, diffuse at a surprisingly slow rate. An example illustrating insight into common difficulties facing during diffusion is, in the early days of long sea voyages, scurvy was the worst killer of the world sailor, worse than warfare, accidents, and all other causes of death. Vasco da Gama's crew of 160 men who sailed with him around the Cape of Good Hope in the year 1497, 100 died of scurvy. Again, in the year 1609, an English sea captain, James Lancaster, evaluated the ability of lemon juice to prevent scurvy. He commanded 4 ships that sailed from England to India by serving 3 teaspoonfuls of lemon juice every day in his 3 ships. Most of these men stayed healthy, but on the other ship, by the halfway point of the journey, 110 out of 278 sailors had died from scurvy. The results were so clear-cut that the British Navy would decide to adopt a scurvy prevention. But it was not until in the year 1747, about 150 years later, that James Lind, a British Navy physician who knew of Lancaster's result, carried out another experiment of the ship, Salisbury, by supplying 2 oranges and a lemon to each scurvy patient. Unfortunately, the supply was exhausted and some patients died. Why were naval authorities so slow to adopt the idea of citrus for scurvy prevention? Historians are not able to provide a very clear explanation. However, other innovations like new ships and new guns were accepted more readily. Well, this is a story about, despite knowing the advantages of an innovation, diffusion occurs at a very slow rate. Now, let's come to the topic, element of diffusion process. Time is an important element in the diffusion process. In fact, most other behavioral science research is timeless, in the sense that the time dimension is simply ignored. But time is an obvious aspect of any communication process. Time does not exist independently like an event, but it is an important aspect of diffusion. In fact, the inclusion of time as a variable in diffusion research can be one of its strengths. The time dimension is involved in diffusion in the following ways. Number 1, in the innovation decision process, from first knowledge of an innovation till its adoption or rejection. Number 2, in the innovativeness of an individual, that is, the relative earliness or lateness with which an innovation is adopted. Number 3, in an innovation's rate of adoption in a system, that is, the number of members that have adopted the innovation in a given time period. Now, let us know what is the meaning of an innovation. According to Frs&Ep Rogers, in the year 1995, extension agents usually anticipate the form and function of an innovation than its meaning to their targeted farmers. Form is the directly observable physical appearance of an innovation, and function is the contribution made by an innovation in the way of life of the people, since farmers usually believe what they see and prefers the benefits of our technology. But meaning of an innovation is a subjective and frequently unconscious perception by a member or farmer of a social system. Extension agents may not always understand the social meaning of the innovation that they themselves introduce, especially the negative consequences that occur when an apparently desirable innovation is used under different conditions. Extension agents may make this mistake if they do not empathize with the innovation's user. Further, let's discuss the topic innovation and uncertainty. People may perceive some degree of uncertainty in the newness of an innovation. Again, according to Frs&Ep Rogers, in the year 1995, uncertainty is the degree to which a number of alternatives are perceived with respect to the occurrence of an event and the relative probability of these alternatives. An innovation presents an individual or an organization with a new alternative that is with new means of solving problems in such a condition that the new alternatives being superior to the previous practice which are not exactly known by the individual for solving his problems. Thus, they are motivated to seek further information about the innovation to cope up with the uncertainty that prevails. It may be generalized that the attributes such as relative advantage, compatibility, triability, observability, and predictability of an innovation as perceived by the members of a social system are positively related to its rate of adoption. The complexity of an innovation as perceived by a member of a social system is negatively related to its rate of adoption. Let us try to know what are the consequences of innovation. Consequences are the changes that occur to an individual or to a social system as a result of the adoption or rejection of an innovation. There are at least 3 categories of consequences. Number 1 is the desirable versus undesirable consequences. Depending on whether the effect of an innovation in a social system are functional or dysfunctional. Number 2 is the direct versus indirect consequences. Depending on whether the changes to an individual or to a social system occur in immediate response to an innovation or as a second-order result of the direct consequences of an innovation. The third point is the anticipated versus unanticipated consequences. Depending on whether the changes are recognized and intended by the members of a social system or not. The undesirable, indirect, and unanticipated consequences of an innovation usually go together, as do the desirable, direct, and anticipated consequences. After all the discussion, now let us come to the conclusion. Technologies for the development and dissemination of which there have been very little interactions with the farmers are less likely to be adopted, particularly by the resource-poor farmer. Benjamin Franklin in the year 1781 said, "To get the bad custom of a country changed and a better new one to be introduced, it is necessary first to remove the prejudices of the people, enlighten their ignorance, and convince them that their interests will be promoted by the proposed changes, and this is not the work of a day." The interactions between the proponents and the participants need some longer time in order to provide an opportunity for exchange of information and experience to reach mutual understanding. This mutual understanding with the forecast of sustainability is very much essential for adoption of a technology innovation by the farmers, that is the client system.